It's a little bit addicting, actually, year after year, to be able to see the results of your labor end up in both amazing food and very happy people. That became something that called me.
It's plenty warm in here, and there's this beautiful array of greens surrounding you, which is brava, well done.
Thank you. Yeah,
For sure.
Mother Nature is amazing indoors, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I have a small gift for you because you're so kindly giving us your time. This is what I call boozy eggnog.
Oh, I didn't need to bring the whiskey.
No, it's all in there.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, no, my whole family, we love it. It's good. I'll keep that away from my kids, though.
I've loved food since I was a little girl, picking the wild strawberries along the driveway, and they were still warm when we put them in the bowl, and just milk. And that was one of the most transformative flavor experiences I've ever had in my life. What's your why? What's your deep why?
It was very much by accident that we ended up here. Al and I came here and we immediately fell in love with this place. We felt something here. We felt like a legacy. We felt the history. Not only were we, starting a farm, starting a relationship, and it became very serious because it's this farm that's here wanting a farmer. It was hard. It was really hard. We realized very quickly we didn't know what the heck we were doing.
Yeah, some people test a relationship by going to Europe together,
right.
But you tested yours by launching a farm together.
Al and I created 4 phrases that essentially drove us. It was our early vision. And it's eat responsibly, bring the land to bear, get out of debt, and laugh. He decided that he did not want to be a full-time farmer. And I had wanted him to be a full-time farmer. I had to be very, very clear. I loved growing food enough to deal with the downsides, enough to deal with the physical, the exhaustion, enough to deal with, working with employees and the stresses that can bring. Because the upside was we had become, in a short period of time, a community farm. That's why I keep doing it. I know that we are growing food for our local community. Without that sense of appreciation and gratitude that we get pretty continuously, it would be too hard.
Well, I feel like I'm going home with amazing bounty, and it's going to get the wheels turning about what I want to make with all these things. Kale, the radicchio, the root vegetables. I'm not leaving without my cilantro.
You're not leaving without the cilantro.
We're going to prepare some of Elizabeth's amazing root vegetables. It was fun to be in her barn where she has a restaurant-sized walk-in to keep everything at the right temperature. So we have our red beets, our parsnips, and the carrots. The red beets I'm going to roast by putting them in foil. It keeps the skins a little moister, makes it easier to peel. This is an arbequina oil. This is available locally at a place called Bazalian's, and they just choose excellent olive oils. What you want to do at this point is to make sure the steam doesn't escape, because it really is the steam that's doing a lot of the hard work of cooking the vegetable. So just crimp all the edges. You want a little room so the steam can get in there and surround the beets and cook them. But that's my little beet roasting package, and I'm going to pop it in the oven right now. I grew up on about 60 acres of land in Cornwall, Vermont, and we had animals on it when I was a kid. We had white-faced Herefords and about 3 horses.
In our very younger years, to me, it was the vision that we would have a nice symbiotic relationship between growing vegetables and having animals. We had to decide, what are we going to get good at? We also have actually a very small farm. It's not really large enough in our minds to be able to accommodate a number of animals that would actually benefit the farm. At some point, I really had to say, what are you going to focus on? And so the vegetables kind of won out. Our farm has probably 10, it's about 10 acres down here. We grow intensively on about 5. You need at least 20 to be able to graze,
rotate,
so yeah, rotate your crops. I mean, we have a philosophy of growing 2 years in vegetables and then 1 year off. So I need to be able to maintain that kind of you know, free acreage.
I like the variety of sizes. I mean, if you want to make little coins and decorate your food, I always think about shapes as, visual elements of my dishes. So I like the variety of shapes. It's very cool. The parsnips, I think, have a kind of unique piney, resinous sort of flavor, and carrots, I think I don't need to tell you what carrots taste like, other than these are nice and big and they're just really, they're beautiful. I'm excited to cut into these guys. There are a lot of different ways to cut shapes of the root vegetables. I personally don't even peel them first because both a lot of flavor and a lot of nutrition are in the skins. So now it's a question of what do you want them to look like. So the big carrots, I'm going to cut them in half first. And you always want to think about your own safety before you cut anything. So it's way better to cut on a solid surface than it is to try and cut something rolling around. So I make sure that I've got something nice and firm. And then now I've got other choices. I can make half moons. I could make quarter moons. I could leave them as these big chunks. But when composing the dish that I have in mind, it's nice to have a variety of shapes. So I'm going to leave these alone. And I'm going to do the other half of the carrot differently. You get different textures, different flavors, different visuals. I just think it's sort of worth playing with. And you're just, in a sense, communing with the vegetable right now, right? You're thinking about it as you're thinking about the different shapes and possibilities. So those are what the carrots are going to look like. Try and drizzle your oil on a big sheet pan. You wind up with puddles of oil that then can sort of smoke in your oven, so I want to avoid that. Hold on to these scraps. Now these present a little bit more of a challenge. So I'm going to try a couple whole, and then I'm going to go into one of these guys. And again, these are great in stocks, these trimmings. They are really flavorful. I mean, parsnip and chicken stock, chicken broth are amazing together. Okay, so we've got very different size. So this part's going to come off first. And this part is where I get to sort of play with different cuts. If you have a little bit of tendrils, it's nice to kind of scrape them off with your knife. But that's really up to you. Basically, the high heat in the oven is going to sort of blister them off anyway. And I'm going to do that again. I'm not going to make a third size that I have to monitor. So I'm going to do sort of, these guys are all going to be ready about the same time. And these guys will be ready about the same time. So even when I'm laying them out, you'll see I'm going to try and sequester them so I'm not like picking through them trying to figure out what happens when. But largely these days I cook for 2, for my husband Tim and myself, and so I don't need to do huge amounts. But if you do have a big family or you're doing a big, just keep going, keep filling up your pan with cut root vegetables. Okay, so now's the part, a little bit of sort of professional technique, which is to line your roasting pan with parchment paper. It's just a good practice. Sometimes your pan is made out of aluminum, and that's another reason to line it. It just creates a barrier between the food and the aluminum. Very light drizzle of olive oil, and I'll be using my hands, which I always wash my hands before I start cooking, to make sure that the oil is evenly coating. In this case, it's heat plus olive oil, which is the essential cooking medium. So sort of deeply roasting. So we got some good Malden salt. I don't want to go crazy with flavorings right now, so I just do salt and pepper and olive oil. And later on you'll see why, because we're going to be adding a lot of interesting flavor notes to the final dish. So these guys are all together. These guys over here. These are going to be together. So single layer is best. But like most things that you care about, when you put them in the oven, you don't just forget that they're in there or just use your timer and say, hey, you know, the recipe said 15 minutes. It's really important to turn on that oven light, crouch down, take a look, maybe every 5 minutes. And what it'll do, in addition to really making sure that you're not overcooking anything, is that it'll get you as a cook more in tune with what happens at what sort of time interval. I think checking this at the 12-minute point probably makes a lot of sense. I hear the term amendments, soil amendments, and I always assumed that was some combination of organic material from animals, perhaps, or other forms of soil nutrition. So can you talk to us about amendments and what do you do here at Indian Line?
Plants need nutrition. They need a lot of it, especially if you want to have the kind of big, healthy, vibrant looking crops that anyone who's trying to make a living wants. First of all, we do active cover cropping. So we have summer, spring, fall, winter cover crops that we try to keep our ground covered year round with something growing on it. And the something growing is usually a combination of a grain and a legume. The legumes are what really, they take nitrogen directly from the air and put it into the soil. It's a fascinating process. You can dig up hairy vetch or...
Hairy what?
It's called hairy vetch. I know, it's a crazy name. Hairy vetch.
Is that edible? Do we eat it, or is that just purely a cover crop? Because as a chef, I've never run into it. Yeah. I'm probably glad I didn't.
It's probably one of the most common winter, fall-grown cover crops in the legume family.
And a vetch is a legume?
Yes,
okay.
A vetch is a legume.
What does vetch mean?
If you let the vetch go to seed, they actually look like very little pea pods.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but not edible?
No, that's not edible. Okay. And it makes this really beautiful purple flower, but in the spring, it just goes crazy, along with the ryegrass, which I plant at the same time. And then, you know, we let that crop grow, cut it, and then it's adding this incredible mulch on top of the soil, and then the plant itself again is taking nitrogen from the air into the soil, and you can see it on these amazing little white nodules that grow on the roots.
Okay, so here we go, giving the first real turn of these roasted vegetables. You can see they're browning and caramelizing and getting depth of flavor and all kinds of layers of flavor. And I'm going to test the big ones. Yeah, they're close to the same amount of time because they have so much surface area exposed to the oven that they've been cooking at a really nice rate. And you can see all that browning just means the sugars in these beautiful vegetables are starting to caramelize, which is what you want. Okay, 5 more minutes. So how do you keep those nodules in the soil? Is that then you turn it over?
We do light tillage. We don't use moldboard plows. We usually use what's called a chisel plow or a disc. Whenever you put any kind of metal in the soil, it does damage to the soil. Like it's just the way it is. You would disc that lightly into the soil, and then the nitrogen just stays in there.
So there's nitrogen, and is potassium the other one? There's another big...
Yeah, it's the big three that people talk about are nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus.
Okay. So you'll test your soil, know what it's sort of hungry for, and then give it that, Yeah,
and then we'll add that. I don't think any farm cannot add anything. There are a whole bunch of micronutrients that people don't talk about besides the nitrogen.
I hope you do, because that's the part that's so fascinating. Are there minerals that the plants need that they're not? I hear a lot about the depletion of magnesium in our soils, and that has an impact on our health.
It's almost all soils in the Northeast are low in boron. Yeah, there's other nutrients like selenium and molybdenum and cobalt. So those are the kind of things that come in some of these dry blends that I get.
Now is when we have a lot of fun with these root vegetables because we're going to add some very bright, really exciting flavors to them. We are blessed here in the Berkshires to have a fermented foods maker called Hosta Hill, and this is their kimchi, which I adore. I'm going to combine the kimchi, some really good sheep's milk yogurt, and cilantro from Elizabeth. Into our mixing bowl goes a nice dollop of the sheep's yogurt. I try and avoid the whey so that the liquid, only because it'll thin my sauce a little bit too much, but it's still really nice. Okay, that goes in. We're going to have to do a little bit of a cut on the kimchi because it's got nice generous pieces of cabbage. So I'm going to run my knife through those. Again, I do this a lot on camera to show you that the honing, the moment where you want to straighten the blade, you want to do that pretty regularly. This will go into my yogurt base. This technique is called chiffonade, which is a ribbon cut of a leafy greens or leafy herbs. And since I did sort of this direction, I'm just going to slightly rotate it that way. Then I have a better chance at having the smaller cut size ultimately. How deep into nurturing and nourishing the soil do you want to get?
You know, I go to lots of farming conferences, and soil health is inevitably, you know, something that I'm very drawn to, because without the soil health, I won't be able to grow healthy food.
Do you know Dan Kittredge?
I do know Dan Kittredge,
I
yeah.
went to, at Kripalu, I think I went to one of his soil conferences.
We maybe were there at the same time.
Who's the farmer from Polyface who was there?
Oh yeah, Joel Salatin.
Oh
yeah.
My God, what a speaker.
Yeah.
What a great storyteller. But so ever since that, I've been fascinated by sort of nerding out on soil science a little bit.
Yeah, no, he is such a firecracker in terms of talking about making it kind of exciting.
Your vegetables seem super healthy and sort of brawny in a good way. Like they're strong.
When you feed the plants, I think the plants look different. When you're feeding the soil, the plants do have what you're talking about. It's a vibrancy,
Yeah.
it's a strength,
Yeah.
rather than kind of being tilted up by
The
fertilizer.
The rocket fuel of
Exactly,
fertilizer, right?
right,
So yeah, it'll
yeah.
make them big, but and also from a chef's perspective, do they bypass the flavor layers and
Right.
levels?
Yeah. Dan talks about that. I think he would be able to take, you know, those leaves from a conventional farm and maybe a leaf from my farm and be able to actually tell the sugar
Demonstrate
levels
it, yeah.
and see how different,
Yeah,
different
yeah.
they are.
Yeah, these are nice.
I love harvesting chard.
How big can it get? Is this sort of its maximum size?
Pretty big.
Yeah. When we were in the hoop house with Elizabeth, I was super drawn to how beautiful her Swiss chard looked. So I immediately started like the wheels turning. What am I going to do with the Swiss chard? And I have in my repertoire a really simple Swiss chard gratin. It doesn't involve making a bechamel sauce or binding or anything. It's really a light treatment. But you can see the leaves are just gorgeous, and we're going to use the stems as well. But before I get into these, I'm going to make a bit of a base note for the gratin, which is this cipollini onion. They're really my favorite. They're showing up right now at the Berkshire Food Co-op, and they're gorgeous. I pre-peeled them because I didn't want to cry on camera and my mascara run. They're quite pungent, which makes them absolutely fantastic to eat. But if you're really sensitive to them, you might want to put on some glasses or reading glasses or something like that. So I'm just doing a very thin slice. They're going to saute in the butter in my pan. And while that's happening, we're going to be tearing into these beautiful leaves of Swiss chard. So into the pan go our sliced cipollini. Great. And I'm going to pop those on the stove, maybe medium heat. They brown really quickly because they have so much sugar in them. They're so flavorful. So these you have to really pay attention to also. What I want to do right now is start tearing these beautiful leaves. Here are the ribs. I'm going to go right along the rib to get the big piece off. Again, right, just sort of right along the rib. And we're going to use a good amount of the ribs. So this is not something to be discarded. We're going to get to that in a minute. So once you get these really large pieces, then just tear them into what you would consider bite-sized pieces. And we are going to pre-saute these. So they're going to get wilted down and a little tender before we put them in the gratin dish. And it's just amazing how big they are. They seem like they were not grown in the Northeast in December, but they were. They have a nice firm texture. They're silky in a way, but they're also robust and firm. They don't seem to mind being torn into nice bite-sized bits. We can set that aside a minute and talk about how to use the stems. Any cut size you want to do works. I think because they're fatter down here, I'm going to cut them in half lengthwise and then do just a quick, what we call in the business a sort of a small or medium dice, probably a small dice. And that will go into the pan with my cipollinis, which I'm going to go check on again. Okay, well, I have not overbrowned my cipollini, which was my goal. I wanted them soft and sweetened up, but not browned. So we can set that down on our trivet. You can hopefully hear the delicate crunch that they have. They're full of water and nutrition from the soil, so they really are nice and crispy. And there was not, because it was harvested right in front of us, there's not any browning, there's no sort of dry stem ends, they're just in absolute peak condition and they're beautiful. So now we're gonna put these in. The stems go right in with the cipollini. And this really is just to soften the stems a little bit before we add the greens. So now that we've softened up the stems, we can add our torn greens. And this becomes a very light sort of initial cooking with just a little bit of salt and pepper, because the remainder of the cooking will happen under the broiler. So I'm gonna crunch, crunch, crunch the Malden flakes between my fingers, break them up a little bit. And then my beautiful black pepper, freshly ground. And that'll go back to the stove briefly, and we'll come back and we'll put the gratin together. Okay, now I'm starting to smell the butter brown just a little bit. I can smell all the layers of the foundational sweetness of the cipollini, and you can see the glossiness of the chard, the stems, and the greens now. So I have preheated my broiler. I am going to now just kind of assemble it as a gratin, which really means just to brown something. It can just be really lightly dressed, so I'm going to do that in the gratin dish. We're going to add some cheeses, a little bit of nutmeg, because I think nutmeg and heavy cream are just phenomenal together. And you know, the imperfections of how it presents can make it really exciting too. So we're going to go in there. And by imperfections, I mean that, you know, it's not maybe totally covered with cream, or there's a little bit of leaf peeking out from under the cheese. Like, to me, those are the things that remind me that the food has its own life force, and you know, you tame it as much as you can, but it's got its own energy as well. So it's a little bit about being gentle, a little bit about being thoughtful, and certainly a lot about paying attention as you're cooking and what the food has to tell you. More sugar to me doesn't necessarily mean better. What makes something have what I call the edges of flavor, where you don't get one dominant note. It's sort of, you get an orchestration of different notes. To me, that's what I'm always after when I'm selecting my ingredients, is that something interests me in its raw form, and then I get to play with it and bring it up to this other level.
And it's true. I think there is this tendency now for people to want food to be sweet, that is the ultimate goal, which I agree should not be the ultimate goal.
You know, we in this country like things big.
Yeah.
We like them sweet, and we like them cheap.
Yeah.
The first layer of flavor, if you will be this beautiful heavy cream. It's from grass-fed cows. This is a very important addition, the Monterey Chèvre, which is made by Rawsonbrook Farms. It's just an incredibly balanced, fresh goat cheese. And so I dot that all over the top. Many cheeses have their very dominant note, which this one is very crisp and clean and almost like a sort of a tanginess. It's fun to balance those flavors with some of these harder aged cheeses. This one is a Pecorino Romano and a Parmigiano Reggiano, both Italian, both aged, and just really a nice complement to the local chev. I really want to get some browning on the cheeses. That just, it changes the flavor in a wonderful way. So here we go. We're going to pop them right under the broiler. You here at Indian Line have a unique business arrangement in terms of the land and who owns it. If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Right, yeah. So Al and I don't actually own the land in which we farm. All of the land is owned by the Community Land Trust in the Southern Berkshires. And then Al and I own all of the buildings, or what they also call improvements. So our house, the barns, the greenhouses, anything that we do to improve the land. So like the hoop houses or our 8-foot fence or little sheds or things, those are actually owned by us. We worked with the Nature Conservancy, the National Nature Conservancy, and they purchased what we call a conservation restriction. We're adjacent to what they call a fen marsh. It's a very unique ecosystem, home to a number of endangered species, plants and animals. We're allowed to farm, we're allowed to have animals, we're allowed to have cottage industries here. And the really amazing thing about the arrangement is that it ensures that farmers will always be here. Written into the lease is that the farm has to be farmed, and it has to be farmed for food that is for human consumption.
And now I'm going to check on my gratin. I grabbed it just at the right time. Again, I used my sense of smell. I could smell the cheese starting to brown, which was a very exciting moment. You're well known in the area as one of the original, if not the original, CSA model. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Indian Line Farm is the oldest CSA in the country, and it was founded by Robin Van En, a local group of folks really interested in creating a more direct relationship between people and their food, created community-supported agriculture in our living room. We have actually the notes to prove it.
Okay, we're going to continue by seasoning up our yogurt with kimchi and cilantro. The cilantro is very fragrant for winter cilantro. I was impressed. I wasn't sure it would have so much flavor. And with a lot of herbs, a huge amount of the flavor is actually still in the aroma. You know, if it doesn't have a fragrance, it's probably not going to resonate on your palate either. So now we just sort of fold these ingredients together. We've got our Hosta Hill kimchi, full fat plain yogurt, and Elizabeth cilantro. Now we know that the carrots are done. Now we have to check on the beets. So at CSA, the words make perfect sense, but is it really that your member would put up the seed money, so to speak, ahead of the growing season, right? So they invest in the crop as well. How do you make a CSA affordable for people who maybe don't have, a great income?
On our commitment forms and online, people are given the option to pay into what we call the Indian Line Farm Fund. And the fund directly goes to produce that we then give to the People's Pantry, or it goes towards folks who request a financial discount form.
So a subsidy,
yeah,
in a sense.
My members just continuously are very, very generous. And so it just means the People's Pantry gets a lot of food from me.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Unwrap it slowly so the steam doesn't rush out at you. It may not, but why take the chance? Just sort of do in reverse what you did before, which is sort of uncrimp the edges and then go into the middle and start to sort of unroll that. And then I just got a little bit of whoosh of steam, so I stopped for a second. Beautiful. Okay. The knife always tells me where things are at. Oh, the little guys are ready. The little guys are totally ready. Here's another wonderful use for the parchment paper, which is to create a barrier on your cutting board so that the beets don't bleed into your cutting board. So these gloves, again, they'll help me keep my hands a little bit from burning, but really the main reason to do it is to keep the red pigment off my hands. So I didn't even trim these beets because anytime you trim them when you're going to roast them or steam them, any breach of the skin will allow the color to come out. And that doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but I like a really dark beet to play with visually. And I think, you know, when anything escapes, if it's color or moisture, you can kind of bet that you're also losing some flavor. Yeah, I think they're going to be a little hard to just rub off. So I'm going to go ahead and use my paring knife and just sort of get right under there. And it's hard to hold on to these beets. They are so hot at the moment. You kind of peel toward your thumb. Wow, this is so great. Nice and tender. I can even feel how soft that little guy got. And just the way a painter might really get their palette all composed, you know exactly what colors and brushes they want to use. You sort of want to do that when you're composing a dish. I think the thing to do here is to take this beautiful Hosta Hill kimchi yogurt with cilantro and make a nice bed. Put that down first. I usually make my base of the largest cuts and then sort of build up from there. So we've got these beautiful cuts of carrot and parsnip. And you want to sort of build some height. It's more intriguing, I think, to the eye to have a little bit of height going on in any dish. And the beets can go in, tuck around. So these are like almost like earthy jewel tones, which are very satisfying to look at. Go. And then these are almost like the confetti or the garnish, or you can think of them as little croutons or something. It's fun to have them in a different shape. And then this is pretty, so I'm going to dab it, but without overwhelming the vegetables underneath. I don't want to cover them up because they have their own beauty. This is Turkish cured sumac, and it just brings up the color. Bob Ross would love this.
The ability to create something from a small seed is like being an artist.